Hey guys, welcome back to a new video, and in this video I'm gonna show you how you can create a save game system inside Unreal Engine. Here you can see I have this little menu and each of them representing save game slot, and if we click on any of them we can either load, save or delete the save game. So let's save the current state of the game. Now let's go back and let's lose some of the health. Now let's come over here and now let's save the game into a different slot. Just notice the current health of the player and save the game into a different slot. And now if we load the previous save game slot, here you can see we are back to that state. Also the health is same as it was before. And just like that, we can also load the slot 2 again. And we are back to that state. Now we can also have a checkpoint system using this save game. So as we cross through this box and then we wanna go back to that checkpoint, we can just load back to that save game. There you go. And this save game also works when we restart a game. As you can see here, we are back to the last save game even after the restart. And finally you can also delete any existing save game slot and the slot will go empty. And you can get this project from my Patreon where you can download all the project files and assets I've ever used in my tutorial videos. The link is in the description. So to do it, first let's right click and create a blueprint class, and here in the all classes search for save game. Here it is, so select this and let's name this player save game. Now this is the blueprint class where we wanna store all the values that we wanna save so that we can load them later, and we are gonna store those values using variables. So let's add a variable here. Let's name this player position. Since it is going to store the position of the player in the world, set the variable type to transform. Now the second value we wanna store is health, and here set the variable type to float. And just like that, you can create more variables to store more values. But there is a better way of doing this, and that is we can store our value in a structure. So in your content browser, right click and in the blueprint, from here you can create structure. Let's name this save game data struct and then open this up. Now in a structure, you can store different variables of different values. The first one, let's name this player position and set variable type to transform. Now from here, let's add another variable and name this health and set variable type to float. You can add as many values you want to store, but I'm just going with these two. Now let's go back to your save game and here delete these two variables and instead add a variable, name this save game data, and in the variable type search for save game data struct which we just created here. And now through this variable we can access all the values we have inside that structure. So just break the structure and here you can access all these values. So now to manage all the functionalities like saving, loading, deleting save games, we are going to do all of that inside the game instance. And to create a game instance, right click, go to blueprint class and here search for the game instance. Select this and let's name this my game instance. Now what a game instance is, it's a class that initiates the moment you open up your game and it persists until you exit the game. So it's a reliable class where you can define all your save game functionalities to use it throughout the whole game. Now one more thing you need to do here is to tell the engine that we are going to use this game instance. So for that, here in the edit, open up your project settings and here in the maps and modes, scroll down and select the game instance we just created. That's it. Now let's go back to your game instance and let's start creating the save game functionality. So first let's create a custom event. Let's name this load save game, and inside this custom event we are going to write all the logic to load the save game. So here search for the does save game exist. So this node will tell us if we have already saved a game in a slot, and to check that it needs a slot name. So let's use slot 1 as a slot name. You can name this anything you want. So as we check this condition and it returns false, that the save game doesn't exist already, then we are just going to create the save game object. Here select the play save game that we had created before, and from this return value promote this to a variable and let's name this save game. So after creating the save game, through this variable we can access the save game data that we have inside here, and to access it, get save game data and then break this further to access the values. Alright, so now what if the save game exists already? Then we are just going to load the save game from slot. And it also requires the slot name, so we are just going to give it the same slot name we gave it before. But here one thing to notice is this returns the generic save game object reference, whereas while creating it, it returns the play save game object reference that we actually need. So for that we need to cast to our player save game, and now we can store the save game reference into this variable. So this is how we load the save game. But here we can do one more thing, is to add an input parameter to this custom event and name this slot name and set the variable type to string and plug it into every slot name parameter. So it will use this slot name value to load the save game. So now when we call this custom event, it will load the save game into this variable so that we can access the save game data that is inside this player save game class. And here we can give it the slot name. Alright, so now let's create another custom event. Let's name this save game slot and add an input parameter of string type and name this slot name. Then add another parameter and name this save game data. And from the variable type, search for save game data struct and select this. So we are just going to give this event the save game data and it is going to save this data into the slot. So get the save game and search for set save game data. So now if we call this event, we have to give it the slot name where we want to save it, and to provide the save game data, search for make structure and you can set these values here. And here you receive that value and set it in a save game. And then the most important part, that is save game to slot. Plug the save game here and slot name to this parameter. If you don't call this data won't be saved in any of the slots. So using these two events, we can load and save the game. Now to actually use them, let's go to your character blueprint. And here to call these events, let's get game instance, then cast to my game instance, and from there you can call this load save game event. So just call that event. And here you can give it the slot name, and that's how you load the save game. Then you can get the save game variable to access the save game data. Now in the similar way, we are going to call the save game slot event. Just search for it. There you go. And give it the same slot name. And here to provide the save game data, make the structure, and here to set the player position, we can get actor transform and plug it to the player position. And for the health, we have this health variable which we are using down here to manage the health of the player. So here in the level, when we overlap with this box, it reduces our player health. And here we also have this widget which we are creating on the event begin play, and in this widget we have this progress bar which shows our character's health value. I am not going into the depth of this health system since this tutorial is about the save game system, but basically this health variable represents our character's health, and you might have different variables that you want to save. Plug it here to save the value in the save game. But before we save the game, we need to load the game. So we are going to load the game on event begin play. So whenever we start the game, the save data is already loaded. And here let's say when we press the E key, then we are going to save the game. And down here, let's say when we load the game, we are just going to print the health value so that we'll know the data is being saved properly. Let's play, and here the health value is 100 for now. So now let's reduce some health of our player and let's press E to save the game and then restart. Here you can see it prints the value 70. That means the data is being stored properly inside the save game. But there is no change in player's position or the health bar. That is because we haven't applied any of the changes. We just got the value saved. So to apply, let's create a custom event and name this apply save game changes. Here also add an input parameter and set the variable type to save game data struct. So you can set the health, and to get the health value, break the parameter and plug it to health. And here is how I set the percentage of health bar. So I'll just get the reference and set the percentage, and I have to divide the health value by 100 as the health bar value is from 0 to 1. And to set the player position, set actor transform and connect it to the parameter. And this is how we apply the changes. Now here, just after loading the save game, we are going to apply the save game changes. And now if we hit play, you can see the save game has been loaded with our player position and health bar value. And now if we move to any other position and press E to save the game and restart, you can see it always loads the save game. So this was just for the example, but we want to implement it with the user widget. Here you can see we have 4 different slots for the save games, and this is quite easy to make. I am just using a vertical box here and these 4 buttons and the tags for each of them. Now when we press any of these buttons, so then we wanna go to this UI where we have 3 options: load, save or delete the game. And to manage both of these widgets, we are going to create a separate user widget. Let's name this save game HUD UI. Open this up and from the palette, get the canvas panel. And we're gonna use widget switcher. Make sure it covers the whole canvas. Set the anchor to center, and then in the user created, drag the menu UI and save game UI under the widget switcher. So with this widget switcher, we can change between user widgets using this active widget index. Now let's set the default visibility of this UI to be hidden, since we're only gonna show it when we press a key. So let's go back to your character blueprint, and here let's remove all this what we did here before. And on event begin play, let's create a widget. And here select the save game HUD UI. Promote this to variable. Let's name this save game HUD and add it to the viewport. Now let's say when we press the tab key, we are going to show this widget. So get the save game HUD and search for set visibility and set it to visible. And then set input mode to game and UI. Then get the player controller and plug it here. The widget to focus is save game HUD, and also search for set show mouse cursor and check this boolean. So this is how we show the menu. So after this menu show up and we click on any of these button, then we want to show this widget. So for that, go to menu UI and add a on click event for the button. Do the same with the rest of the buttons. Now when we press any of these buttons, then this widget should know which button was pressed in the previous menu so that it can load, save or delete the slot accordingly. So for that, let's add a variable here, name this slot name and variable type to string, and we will set the slot name when we click the button. Copy it for all of the clicks and then change the slot names accordingly. So after you're done, go to your save game HUD, and here to change from one menu to another, let's create a custom event and name this switch widget. Then add an input parameter, name this index and variable type to integer. Then get the widget switcher and search for set active widget index, and here connect the index parameter. And this is how we will switch the widget, and through this event we are also going to pass this slot name from menu UI to save game UI, because in the save game HUD we have reference to both. So here in the save game UI, let's create the variable slot name of string data type, just as same we created before, but to receive the value. Now let's come back to this switch widget event, and here get the menu UI, through that get the slot name, and then get the save game UI and set the slot name and just connect the parameters. Now before we send the slot name to the save game UI, first we want to check a condition that if the active widget is save game UI. So just compare it like this, and only if this is true, then only the save game UI going to receive the slot name. Now we need to call this event when we click on any of these slots. For that we need to have the reference to the save game HUD. So here add the variable, name this save game HUD, and from the variable type, search for the save game HUD object reference. Now through this variable, we are going to call that switch widget event. Now here for the index, if we go to save game HUD, in the widget switcher, if we change this index to 1, then it displays the save game UI. So here also we need to set our index to 1 and connect this event with every click event. Now this reference obviously won't be valid because we created this out of nowhere. So to make this valid, go to save game HUD, and on the event construct, get the menu UI and set the save game HUD and give it the self reference, and now there will be no issue. Now here we also want to add a back button so that we can go back after switching or hide this widget. So from the palette, add a button, name this back button. Then you can resize it and position it accordingly. I'm gonna give it a red color, and also I'm gonna add a text and name this back. So now let's add an on click event. So let's get a branch, and first we are going to check if the active widget index is greater than 0. That means we are at the save game UI, and then if we click this back button, we are going to switch back to the menu UI. So to the widget switcher, set the active widget index and subtract the active widget index by 1 and connect the parameter. Now if the active widget index is already smaller or equals to 0, then we are just going to hide the widget. So set the visibility to hidden. And if you remember, when we press tab, we set the input mode to game and UI and shows the mouse cursor. So here let's get the player controller and set the input mode to game only. And also search for set show mouse cursor and make it remain unchecked. So now let's test the UI. Press tab, we have this menu, click on any of the slot and we got save game UI. Now we click on back button and it's also working fine. And now finally we need to make this load, save and delete game button working. So for that, let's go to save game UI and let's add an on click event for the load game. Now here get the game instance to call this load save game slot event. But here we need to cast to my game instance in order to access the events inside of that. It needs the slot name. For that we have this slot name variable we created before. But here the main problem is that this event is only meant to load the save game into this variable and it doesn't apply the changes. For that we have event inside the character blueprint. And for the save game button, let's add an on click event and cast to my game instance and call the save game slot event. Here it needs the save game data that we wanna save. But this data can only be provided by the character blueprint, and this is where the problem arises. Also using cast is quite expensive, so we are going to use a different way. So we are gonna use blueprint interface to communicate between blueprints. Just name this save game BP interface, open this up, and here let's name our first function load save game reference. And here add an input parameter, name this slot name, variable type of string, and also add an output parameter, name this exist and set it to boolean. It's just gonna load the save game in the variable and return if the save game exists. Now let's add another function, name this load save game. Now this is the overall function that will load the save game and apply the changes. And here add an input parameter, name this slot name and make sure it's a string. Now we need to add this blueprint interface inside our game instance blueprint in order to access these functions. So in the game instance, go to class settings and down here you can add your save game blueprint interface. So here under the interfaces, you can see those two functions that we created. Now for the load save game reference, what we're gonna do is we're gonna move this code that we already created inside of the load save game reference. And then here in the return node, connect the does save game exist return value. So we don't need this event anymore, neither this one. Now let's search for the event load save game and call the load save game reference function inside this. Connect the slot name parameter and after loading let's check if the save game already exists. If it does exist, only then we are going to apply the save game changes. But this function is inside the character blueprint. So we can either cast to a character blueprint or we can get the reference using interface. So let's add a new function called this set character reference and then add an input parameter, set the variable type to your character blueprint and call this character reference. Now go back to your game instance and search for event set character reference. Promote this parameter to a variable. Let's name this third person character. Now to make this reference variable valid, go to your character blueprint and on the event begin play, call this set character reference event. Then get game instance and connect it to the target and for the character ref, give it the self reference. Alright, so now let's go to your game instance and this character reference will be valid now. So get your character reference and we are going to call this apply save game changes event. So just search for it and there you go. Now you can get your save game and through that get your save game data and plug it here to apply the changes. And this is how we load and apply the save game changes using a single event. So now go back to your save game UI and here when we click on this load game button, we are going to call that event. So get game instance and since it's a blueprint interface, we can directly call our load save game event. And plug your slot name variable here. So this is how we load and apply the save game. Now to save game to slot, go to your blueprint interface again and here add a function, call this set save game data. Add an input parameter, name the slot name and variable type of string. Add another input parameter, call this save game data and set variable type to a save game data struct. This function will save the data into the slot. Now add another function, call this save game slot and this will only need one input parameter, that is slot name. Now go back to your game instance and here call that event set save game data. Here we are going to save the provided data into a save game slot. So to save the data, get your save game and here search for set save game data. But before we set the data, this save game reference should be valid. And to make this valid, we need to load the save game first. So here just call the load save game reference event first. And then after that, we are going to set the save game data. And here you can break the provided save game data to store only some specific variable, but I am just going to store all the provided data. And the most important part is to save game to slot. Otherwise, the data that you set, it won't be saved into a slot. Now we are done with the set save game data and now let's call event save game slot. Here we just need to call this event. So just call set save game data and connect the slot name parameter. Now to infeed the save game data here, search for make struct and then get your character reference. And for the player position, we're gonna get actor transform and plug it into player position. And for the health, from the character reference, search for health and plug it there. Now this data will be loaded and saved here. Now go back to your save game UI, get the game instance and call your save game slot event. And here just plug the slot name variable. So we don't need to provide any save game data here and this event works on its own. Now for the delete game, this one is quite easy. Just go to your blueprint interface and here add a function, call this delete save game and add an input parameter, call it slot name and variable type to string. Now in your character blueprint, search for event delete save game and here first we're gonna check does save game exist. And only if the save game exists already, then we are going to delete the game from slot. Connect the slot name parameter and deleting the slot was that easy. Now in the save game UI, when you click the delete button, you just need to call that event. And here just provide it the slot name. So now let's test this. So let's just go over here and press tab. Let's select the first slot and save the game here. Now let's go somewhere else. Get the menu. This time go to slot 2 and save the game. Now let's try to load the slot 1. And there you can see it's working and our character is back to that position. And just like this, we can also load the slot 2 and there you go. But now we also want this empty text to change to the slot name. Also, one more thing, in your character blueprint, at the event begin play, get your game instance and you need to load the save game here so that all the changes will be loaded as soon as your character spawns. Now here, in order to change this text when you save the game, make sure this text is set to is variable right here so that you can access it in the graph. Now here in the graph, create a custom event, call this update button text. Now get for each loop and here make an array. We want this array to be string type, so we are just gonna plug this slot name and add 3 more pins. Now list all of your slot names here. After you list them, and then we're gonna check if they exist. And if it do exist, then get all of your text here and make an array out of it and connect it to all the text. Then get a copy and we are going to use the index of the slot that exists and then set the text if it exists, and the text is going to be the slot name that we listed, and if the slot doesn't exist, then the text is going to be remain empty. So this is how we are going to update the text. But when are we going to call this event? So when you click the back button, it will be the most relevant event when you can call this update text event, because that is when you will be switching from this menu to the previous menu. So in the graph, when we click the back button, get the menu UI and call this update button text. Now to create a fade effect when we load the game, I have this widget over here where we are playing an animation on this border of render opacity with 3 keyframes which are going from 0 to 1 and 1 to 0. And on event construct, we are playing this animation and after a 1 second delay, we are removing this widget. So here, before we load the game, get the slot name and we are going to check if save game exists. If it do, then we are going to create a widget that is our fade widget and then add it to the viewport. Then add a delay of 0.5, which is exactly the half time of that animation, where the screen will completely go black. That's when we are going to load the game and the animation will end by itself. So let's play and test this. So here first let's reduce some of our health. And let's go over here. Now let's save the game on slot 3. And now let's go back and load the slot 2. There you can see the transition is working fine. And then we can also load the slot 3 again. Now let's try to delete slot 2, and if we go back, you can see the text is now empty. That means there is no saved slot there. Now using this save system, we can also make checkpoints, and it's really easy now. So create a blueprint class of vector type, call this checkpoint BP, open this up, and here add a box component. Let's call this checkpoint box, and you can resize it accordingly. Then on the box right click and add a begin overlap event. Here first we are going to check if the actor that overlaps this box is a player character, and if it is, then get the game instance and call the save game slot. You can give any slot name you want. I'm gonna uncheck this hidden in-game option here to see the checkpoint box while playing. And now finally let's place this checkbox in your level and hit play. So let's go through this checkbox and restart the game. Here you can see the save game has been loaded and we are continuing from that checkpoint. So this is all. We made the save game menu working, checkpoint system, and did all that in a structured way. And if you appreciate my work, you can support me on Patreon, where you can download and access all the project files and assets I've ever used in my tutorial videos. The link is in the description. And you can also join my Discord server, where you can interact with other developers of this community. And if this video helped you out, you can like and subscribe to my YouTube channel. And I want to thank the Patreon members of this month. Thank you so much for your support. It means a lot. Alright, till then, see you. Bye bye.